This is our first Blue Soul chat in front of an audience. We couldn't be more excited about Tim. We originally discovered Tim's work when I was online looking for others who had channeled Christ consciousness. Now, Tim does not channel Christ consciousness at all, but he came up in the search, and so we got a few of his books, and we're totally blown away. Like, who is this man? We decided to invite him to TEDx Berkeley. Some of you know that I curate TEDx Berkeley, and so he came over for that. And if you haven't seen his talk, it's going to be live on video soon, so you can have a look at it. But his work is just deeply profound, and we love his work, and we love Debbie too. His wife is here in the audience. A little bit about Tim. Tim calls himself a philosopher, but there is so much more to who he is. But he's also the author of more than 30 books on mysticism, philosophy, spirituality, and beyond, one of which was a top 10 bestseller in the UK and the United States. He's a keynote speaker at major conferences. He's appeared in the History Channel documentary Beyond the Da Vinci Code, as well as several other programs. And he runs seminars in the US, Europe, and South Africa, exploring the experience of gnosis, which is the knowledge of spiritual mysteries, and psyche, which you're going to hear a lot about today, the Greek word for soul or spirit. In fact, he ran a workshop just this past weekend, and we went to it, and it was amazing. What we love most about Tim's communication style is that he adds humor with a philosophical undertone while embracing that spirituality is real. And he makes profound ideas very easy to understand. Okay, Timothy, we have spent a lot of time dancing between science and spirituality, honoring both sides, yet perplexed by the paradoxical nature of our existence. In other words, spirituality is still stuck in an outdated pre-rational religious mindset. And I don't think there's anyone in this room who couldn't resonate with that. And you talk about that a lot in Soul Story. So you attempt to bring us into a new paradigm of thinking in that book. You call it emergent spirituality. Can you explain that to the group and what you mean by that?
Yeah. So, I'm going to have to stand up. Thank you. I just need to stand. Sorry. Hello, everybody. So, what perplexes me is the paradox of my own experience. And really, when I'm a philosopher, what it really means is I'm someone who finds this experience very mysterious. And one of the things which I notice, and I'm guessing you might have had this too, is that there's a side of life which is very cause and effect. You know, I drop something, it falls, and I drop it, it falls again, and it doesn't matter how many times I do it, it does the same thing. And then there's a side of life which is magical, so that I can step into something and life becomes like a dream, like it's saying something to me. And there's a side of life which is really brutal. And I've seen terrible things happen to beautiful people a lot. And yet there's also something where when I go into this deep awake state, that there's such a profound sense that despite all of that, life is good. Mm-hmm. And, well, you know, more than that, life is good, death is safe. And what really, really matters is love. Now, I'm aware that that's the deepest thing I know, and yet it sounds very childlike and naive. And compared to this other side of life, because there is also a sense in which, you know, life is tragic, it's hard. So how do those sit together? Now, science seems to describe one very well, and spirituality seems to describe the other very well, and I've been looking for how the hell do you bring those two together, for myself as much as anything. How can they sit together? Because they do. They are already sitting together. So I'm aware that in the past that wasn't an issue. Spirituality didn't have to deal with that, or it dealt with it by saying this world we're in was a kind of a trap for the soul. It was a negative thing. It was something we'd fallen into. So you get most of ancient spirituality is more than 2,000 years old, nearly all of it, in its root, and it has a mythos of the fall. We've fallen from a perfect place, which is why it's good, into a bad place. God's had a dream and we've got lost. The soul's got trapped in a body, and the job is to purify yourself and get free and get away. So they didn't have our modern understanding, and that's a natural place to end up. I'm not sure it's the place we need to stay. What I love about science, apart from its power of explanation, that it can bring me in a tin box from the other side of the world to come and see you, that needs to be taken seriously, because that's magic on a level our ancestors could not possibly have dreamed of. And yet there it is, it's true. So that really needs to be acknowledged. It's very strong stuff. And at the root of modern science is this incredible new story. A new myth, if you like, and that's the myth of evolution, which says everything in the universe has evolved. We've gone from 13.8 billion years ago, we've gone from hydrogen and helium to us in this room. That's an incredible story, and yet it works. It's powerfully explanatory. So the essence of what I'm exploring in emergent spirituality is this. What happens if we understand spirituality as part of that story? Not as a fall, but as an evolution. And what if the overall story is simply one of emergence? It starts with the simplest of things, basic matter, actually a gas, and it will turn into the whole physical universe 10 billion years later. That will lead to the first form of life, the first cell. That will lead to all of the incredible variation of life that we see around us. And then the current story ends there. But what happens if we see that's not the end? Because the thing which is actually the most recent thing to emerge through this huge evolutionary story is the psyche. No scientists would disagree with that. The latest thing to emerge is the psyche. What is the psyche? This thing you're experiencing right now, in which you're having thoughts and images. Now, the word psyche, it's a Greek word, it means soul. It's the soul. So my basic thesis is simply this. Look, soul is the latest, most emergent thing to arise. It's led from basic matter to this experience of soul. And what intrigues me about it, if you paid attention right now, you'll see that what's in the psyche or soul isn't made of matter. And it doesn't exist anywhere in the material world. So basic matter has evolved into this thing which is not made of matter. And the simple idea, there's an awful lot I can say about it, but I'm just going to stick with this for now. My basic idea is to say, look, this soul we're experiencing, this psyche, is a whole dimension of existence. It's a non-material dimension of existence, and it has evolved out of the least emergent basic matter. And whereas what science does is reductionist, or not really used to be, 100 years ago, and we're still stuck in that mindset, science reduces things and it goes, the most basic thing is real. So that's where it'll come and go, this feeling of love I have for my wife, that's really just chemicals. Or your ability to go, I agree or I disagree, that's an illusion. Really it's just atoms. All of that stuff, it's taking the most emergent, the thing that's come last, and going, that's not really real. Only the basic thing is real. What the new paradigm in science does is it goes, no. The whole process has been one of emergence, and the more emergent cannot be reduced to the less emergent. It is more than, not less than. And it's all real. So the basic thesis is, look, this area that spirituality has been exploring, to do with meaning and magic and immortality and all the things that spirituality focuses on, actually are to do with the last stage of evolutionary emergence. And once we see that, we can see that spirituality and science are not contradictory at all. They're complementary because they address these two different levels in the one story. And if we can actually articulate that and we can actually have one homogeneous understanding, integrated understanding. And I personally think if we can do that, it will be the most monumental jump forward for human culture. It will just change everything.
It's getting me to rethink some of my questions. All right, but I will move into this just because so many of us here live in the Bay Area, and I think it will hit home. We are living through something you call a soul crisis, a description that not only will resonate with so many of us in the room, where technology, albeit a connector, is also wearing us down and disrupting real deep connections with people and with nature. So I know your use of soul crisis and our description about your work is one of the things that brought a few people here tonight. So you say that our culture is adopting a philosophy that is soul destroying. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So what strikes me about where we've ended up right now, and it's particularly true, I think, of the UK, and I think it's probably true of here too, is that there's this thing we kind of know we need to leave behind, which is superstitious religion, because it's irrational, it's outdated, the myths no longer work, we no longer can make sense of the idea the world was created in 7 days and blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of going. And the thing we've got in to replace it as a culture has been secular science. And when I say it's soul destroying, I mean literally, or it's soul denying. Because what it says is the psyche isn't something, it isn't the most emergent level of reality, it isn't the most important thing to have emerged through, it's actually just a side effect of a piece of meat. That's it. And all these, it can be reduced, it's reductionist, which literally destroys the very thing which gives meaning. I mean, one of the lovely things I did at TED, because I love doing it, I'll do it now because you can get it, is to just see the difference between, let me just do one more thing first. The essential thing, I've already said this, but let me just say it one more time. I love to look at the obvious because it's so profound. So one of the things which I got from my studies, I've written 35 books on all these different spiritual traditions. About 20 years ago, I was working on the Gnostic Christian tradition, and I came across these words for physis and psyche, which was body and soul. And, you know, every tradition you go to, there's it, we're body and soul. And now we get, the words are being so theologized that people say, you know, do you believe in the soul? As if it's something you could not believe in. Whereas what I'm suggesting is if you go back to, you clear off all the theology and you go down to the root meaning of these words like physis and psyche, body and soul, it's actually a statement of the completely obvious, which is you're experiencing a flow of sensation, which is, you know, looking, and that's the body, that's the sensory world of the body, and you're experiencing a flow of imagination, a non-material domain, that's the soul. You can't not be experiencing them. You're always experiencing them. Well, actually, you're always experiencing the soul. You're not always experiencing the body. Because the soul is more integral to what you are. You can go off into just the soul and leave the body behind. You do that most nights. So those two are just, right now, they're going the whole time. And then what you can see is that in the sensory world of the body, right now, try this, it's fun, you are looking at a monkey wearing clothes making funny noises. That's actually what you're sensing. Can you get that? But in the psyche or the soul, you're discerning meaning. But there's no meaning in the funny noises. There's no meaning in the sound waves. That's just a pure sensation. It could be, but those sounds have meaning which you perceive in psyche. So meaning's in the psyche, and what's happening is we're degrading what that is. So my feeling is, the reason that we're having the soul crisis is because we desperately need a new understanding. And I really think what is coming. I think what's coming because I'm an optimist. There's something about the process of waking up which makes me incredibly optimistic. There's such goodness here. So I think one's coming, and I think it's coming soon, and my work is an attempt to contribute to that. And what it needs to do is it needs, I feel what's happened is we've had a kind of irrational or pre-rational, not irrational, pre-rational spirituality, which was a world of images where the beliefs were not held in the way we do. No one believed that the world was created in 7 days because of evidence. It was not like that. It was more like you would like a poem or something, that level. And then science came in and questioned all of that, and we moved from pre-rational to rational. Hallelujah! Huge step forward. A lot of us have still yet to make that step. Really. That's a good step. But the price we paid is we lost baby in the bathwater. Now what we need is a rational spirituality, or a trans-rational spirituality, to use a buzz phrase, because what that does is it goes, right, we still need the ability to think clearly and question, and we need to be open to these extraordinary experiences which are available to us, which are, just... and all of which are very significant and real. So my hope is that I was very cheeky. I seem to get away with it, but at the end of the TEDx, I thought, how am I going to end this? And I thought, damn it, I'm just going to say what I think. And where I ended up was, look, I think this new understanding is coming. I think when it comes, we're certainly not there, nowhere near there, but it is coming. But when it comes, I think it's going to be as big a jump forward as science was. I think that's what we're looking at. I think we're looking at the same. We are the same as those people 400 years ago, where scientists were just beginning to go. They all thought the world was made in 7 days. Newton, all these great people, they thought they were just beginning to find science, and it was going to lead to this. Can you imagine bringing them here and going, look what you did? I think it's the same now, except it'll move quicker. There's a new understanding, and what it requires, more than anything, is for spirituality to catch up. Because I'm so frustrated with it. It's so far behind. And I think it just needs to up its game. And that's up to us to do that. And then we can bring these two together. And then I think something really significant. Because then then the culture as a whole will see this experience we're having in a whole new way. So in the answer to your thing about technology, I really don't think technology is the problem. I think technology is great. I think it's perfect. It's connected us in new ways, and it's led to new problems we didn't have before. Of course it did. How could it not? And we need to answer those problems. I mean, people keep telling me that kids are disconnected. All the kids I know are even more connected. When I was young, I was connected physically, and then I never saw my friends. Now, my kids, I see them, they're really connected with each other, and then they go away and they're still really connected with each other. It's like mass connection is happening. So I know there's downsides, and people get stuck in bedrooms and all that. That's real. But overall, it feels like this is a good thing. But technology's not going to solve the problem either. I think the technology thing will carry on. And we think that's the future because we're not very imaginative. So we think the future will be more of the past. But the future will actually be, that will just go on. But that's the old thing carrying on. The future will be a shift in what we understand this is. This thing we're in, what life and death is, what the soul is, that will be the shift. The direction which the culture generally is not looking at. Just a small handful of people, because that's where it always comes from, the small handful of people. So I think that's what will do it.
Very good. Okay. I didn't really plan any questions, but I have so many. Every night, this gets a little weird, but every night our spirit guides come through and they teach us. They're constantly teaching us. They tell us many things that there's no way that Renee and I could possibly understand in this lifetime. It's beyond our comprehension. One thing that I'm always curious about, and I don't completely understand, is the difference between the soul and consciousness. the soul, as our spirit guides tell us, that they come into me and they use my soul and my body and my consciousness to work, to talk, to heal, and to do what they have to do. And then there are the other guys.
So the question is...
So the question is,
Consciousness.
what is the difference between the soul and the consciousness, and how do they relate to each other? And how does it all relate to consciousness, soul, and body?
Great question. Okay. Yeah. Well, we're friends now. Okay, so I'm going to answer that question and then I'm going to disagree with myself. So the first answer I want to give is that when I talked about studying the ancient Christian tradition, this is where I really homed in. That was my big bestseller. So there was a real concentration for a while, even though most of my books are on Eastern traditions. I saw there wasn't just body and soul, there was also this third one, spirit, which I translated as consciousness, mainly influenced by the East, where Sanskrit words, which were also not consciousness, had been translated by the word consciousness. So this was a modern word brought in to signify this other thing. So I want to describe what that other thing is, and then I want to suggest that consciousness is not a good word to use for it, even though I myself have used it many, many times in a lot of books. I think it's a misleading word, and I'll tell you why. So this third thing, what's the third thing? So there's body and soul. So body and soul is an experience you're having right now, a flow of sensation, a flow of imagination. They're happening the whole time. There they are. Can't miss them. So the question then is, what is experiencing that? What's the experiencer? And one of the things which I like to play with sometimes is just throw some quotes together. So I'm going to give you a quote which I love from the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas. And in that, the figure of Jesus is teaching about the gnosis, the awakening. And he says, I will show you what you cannot see, what you cannot hear, what you cannot touch, and what cannot be imagined. And then if you go back 5, maybe even 700 years to the Upanishads, now we're in India, and in one of the Upanishads it says it's the same thing, but it's like a koan or a riddle. And there it says, what is it that cannot be seen that makes seeing possible? What is it that cannot be heard that makes listening possible? What is it that cannot be touched that makes touch possible? What is it that cannot be imagined that makes imagination possible? So those two are pointing to spirit or essence. Essence is a good translation of spirit. Essence comes from the Latin esse, to be. And I think the best word for it is being. It's an old word that Plato used. There's being. So one of the things you get with Plato is, look, there is a state of being which you experience as this knowledge that you are, that you exist. It has no colour. The thing which is looking doesn't have any colour. The thing you're looking at has colour. It doesn't have any shape. The thing you look at has shape. It makes no noise. The thing you're listening to has noise. So the third element, spirit or being, is this formless presence. So here, from all the books I've written on all of these different mystical traditions, if you dive in deep enough, you get this extraordinary teaching in all of them, which is your deepest being has no form. It's empty, or it's potential, because it's the thing that's looking you can't see. So here's the flow of looking, and then there's this formless presence which you experience as being, which is experiencing looking and listening and thinking and all of it. And that opens up this other profound teaching of the High Hall mysticism, which is, whilst your body is relatively individual, obviously, my body couldn't exist without the whole of nature and the sun, but I can leave the room and you stay in it. It's independent to some degree, so it's individuated. So is yours. Hurrah! We're individuals, and the soul even more so. You have your own thoughts. That's amazing. Your own history, your own memories, your own dreams, your own pain, it's you. You are a unique story. Wonderful. So that's our individuality. But because if you take your attention, and this is what deep meditation's about, and sink it back into your being, there's this formless presence which is everywhere and nowhere. And it has no limit to it. So as you become conscious of it, you start realizing, oh, my being is the being. There's one of us. It's all one being. So Tim's this individual, but through Tim I realized it's all one. And that is the deep awake state. Because the characteristic of it is this monumental love. Because love is how that sense of connection feels. So if you think about anyone you love, I've got someone I love right in front of me here. I've loved her since the moment I met her, whatever it was, 20-something years ago. It's because Deborah's separate from me. Hurrah! I'm pleased about that. But also, she's not. We're so profoundly connected that there's a connection through the separateness. And of course, so the love is how the oneness feels, I think. So that what arises in my body. So once you hit this place in your deep being, and you go, oh my God, it's all one. I'm one with everything. There's a love which is so big it can embrace everything. Even your enemies. Well, that line in the Christian tradition, what a line that is. Love your enemies. Wow. That big. It's enormous. So it's enormous. And I think actually this realization is the actual cutting edge of where evolution has taken us right now. This is the next thing that's coming. Is that. So finally then consciousness. So we got what the thing is, whatever name we give it. I think names we can give it now are a being, I think, is good. Because it just is. Potentiality is good. Because it has no form, but it's the potential to be everything and experience everything. Spirit is a traditional name. No one knows what it means, so we're pretty safe with that.
Wouldn't you say, it's funny, you say spirit.
Yeah.
From a Latin word, spirare, it means breath.
Breath or air, yes. Yes.
Breath.
Yeah.
And they often come through when they say they are breath.
Yeah.
And
so we use, it's interesting because these words, the problem is the words have been used in different ways over the centuries. So all that matters is we know what we're pointing to. So sometimes the word spirit or spiritus is used for soul.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's an individual.
that's right.
It's like an individual. So there is something individual. Call it what you like. I call it soul. That's traditional because of where I've picked up the words. If you call it a spirit, it's fine. Often in the animistic traditions, they would call it spirit, and the spirits or the spirit world is all about. And they're talking about individuated psyche. And then there's something else, which is what. Now the word that gets used for that often in kind of modern hip non-dual circles is consciousness, and I've done that. And to try and make other traditions accessible, I use that. The reason I think it's a mistake is because you end up saying, in the beginning there was consciousness. And I don't think that's sustainable, because I think consciousness is actually an emergent property of the universe. It's one of the most emergent properties. It wasn't there at the beginning, it's there at the end, because it starts with the simple and ends up with the more emergent. So that we haven't gone from consciousness, we're going to greater consciousness. And so consciousness, I think, the reason we use the word consciousness is because if you reflect on your being now, you're conscious of it. So you rarefy it as consciousness or awareness. And that's okay, that's fine. That's what I did, and if that works, that's fine. But then if you try and put that in an evolutionary cosmology, you get very confused. because then you have to, because it's come from something unconscious. That's the point. The overall mythos, I'll just say this and hopefully let it hang and you might get what I mean by it. For me, the overall story, if you wanted to pare it down, is we're moving from an unconscious oneness, which is the pure potentiality, the formless, the timeless. It's a oneness, but it's un-everything. It's not just unconscious, it's just but it's unconscious. It's where you go in deep sleep. It's unconscious. We've arisen from unconscious oneness through individuated form, which has led to increasing consciousness, until we're conscious enough that through our souls we can be conscious of the one. So it's gone from unconscious oneness through conscious separateness to conscious oneness. That's the movement. And the last place is both and. It's both individual and all one. So that's why I ended up questioning the use of that word.
Okay, well, I think this next question on evolution doesn't make sense in this, so I'm actually going to move to one of my favorite parts about your book, actually. Tim has created all this new language in his latest book. Some of it's very humorous, and some of it is a different explanation for some of the things that we already know or may be familiar with. And there's even a really cool little glossary in the back that explains it all. But my favorites are life stream, soul stream, and matter streams. Especially soul stream. I love that. We love it so much that we use it all the time as if everyone's going to know what we mean by it. So how can you relate these to ideas and experiences that we may already have? Because many of us, I think it's just the best word for some of the things that we already know and that we've learned from other ideologies and spiritual practices.
Yeah, okay, so one of the foundations for this philosophy, which I've ended up calling unividualism for reasons that I can explain later, but it's in the soul story as emergent spirituality, is an idea about time. So evolution is all about time. And because the myth of the fall is in spirituality tends to have a very it sees time as some sort of an illusion that you're stuck in. I want to disagree with that. I think time is the fundamental nature of reality. And what I mean by that is there is never an experience which you're having which isn't one thing after another. Even to make sense of what I love about it, when people say to me, time's an illusion, I think, well, that sentence only makes sense because it has a beginning and an end. It's only because of time that you can even say that time is an illusion. There has never been an experience which has not been one thing after another. So my method as a philosopher is just to look at this moment. And what I see in this moment is time. So actually what I see in this moment is a flow of experiences, body and soul, and then this timeless present witnessing them. So there's something formless and timeless, witnessing this flow of time. Plato called it being and becoming. That's the fundamental nature of this moment. Can you get that? There it is. So what's the nature of time? And I think we've misunderstood the nature of time because we have the wrong analogy. In English, we say that time passes, but I don't think it does pass. I think it's much more interesting than that. I think actually the past accumulates. There's just more and more of it all the time. And I don't think it's gone anywhere. I think it's right here in this moment. I don't think anything is ever lost. I think everything that has come into form is formed forever. And it's implicit in this moment, because this moment contains within it everything that's ever happened before. It involved, you choosing to come, us learning to speak English, the evolution of the human body, the Big Bang, everything. Everything. So here's two things I notice about every single moment. Every moment realizes a new potentiality. Always. Always. Every moment is emergent. It's never happened before, and every moment builds on and must contain everything that's happened previously. Every single one. So there we go. So this moment here is the meeting of these great polarities. It's the meeting of everything that's happened and everything that could happen is in this moment, which is another name for the formless potentiality and the flow of form, being and becoming. These are different names for the same thing, and they're all here. So the past hasn't gone anywhere. So right now, everything you've been is meeting everything I've been. So we need to be able to be sophisticated enough to know that when we talk about things, it's a kind of shorthand, because there are no things. There's only processes. Everything exists actually in time. And if you know, it's like if you took the camera and you speeded it up, you'd see that even the chair was a process. Everything's a process. Everything is in time, especially us. So what I did was I wanted to, when I wrote Soul Story, I wanted to try and say, look, this thing which you call the soul, it's not a thing. It's a process. The extreme of experiences, the stream of imaginary experiences you're having, that is the soul. It's a soul stream. It is the accumulation of your imaginary experience. That's what it is. And the same with the body. It looks like a thing because of the rate of change that we witness. But it's a process. One of the things I love is, last time I was in Nevada was over 10 years ago. There is not a single atom in my body which is the same. Isn't that far out? It's a process. It's a process. So I call that the soul stream and the soma stream. Soma means body. To go, look, get this idea. Everything is time. Everything is this flow. And right down to atoms, matter streams. So you can have, when we talk about matter, we're talking about a process. When we're talking about life, it's a life stream. Everything is everything is the time stream. That's what it is. And so let me just leave you with this thought then on this, from this question, because this is a big one for me. Is that, I've woken up ever since I was 12 years old, probably younger, with the question, what is this? What is this we're in? What the hell is it? What is it? And then what should we be doing with it? And I've got an answer for you. It's all provisional. All of my, just so you know, I haven't had a chance to say this, but everything I'm saying tonight is predicated on. Okay? Don't for 1 minute think I'm sitting here going, this is the way it is. But what I'm doing is going, how about this as a guess? Does this make sense? And if we can keep doing that enough, we'll get the best story. Yeah. So we want the mystery is endless and infinite, and then let's find the best story that we can find provisionally, and then let's make it better. So in that spirit of, how about this? As a way of saying what this is the realization of potentiality in ever more emergent ways. That's what this is. In this universe, it started, we think, 13.8 billion years ago. And the first things that were realized were very simple. But because the past accumulates, there was more and more information, and it evolved. And that led to more emergent forms. So once you got oxygen and hydrogen, you could have water. And on until you could get life, and then on until you could get sentience, and then on until you could get imagination, psyche, soul, and on until you could get psyche, soul, where it was conscious that, it was the whole thing. Conscious of the emptiness, the potentiality from which it all was arising. And that potentiality isn't 13.8 billion years ago, it's now. That potentiality is right here, right now, always here, and always creative. And what we're doing, right this minute, we are attempting to realize potentiality in a more emergent way. And we're doing it in soul. Our bodies aren't particularly morphing, but our soul is right now, because we're sharing ideas, and they're emergent, they're new ideas. And every time one of us takes it up and sees the world in a new way, the world becomes more emergent. So this is that very process of realizing potentiality in more and more emergent ways. And when I said I want to know what it is so I can know what to do with it, the obvious thing that comes from that is, well, my job then is to do that, is to realise the potentiality in Tim in the most emergent way I possibly can, and bring that to life, to work out what that is, and then to contribute it to the collective. And that feels very meaningful.
Yes. Very good. When you were talking, you mentioned something. You keep saying things, and things keep popping into my mind. You said, "in this universe."
Yeah.
What did you mean by that?
Okay, so that's a great question. And thank you for picking up on it, because I just slipped it in, didn't I? But what I meant by that is what I do in Soul Story and what I do in my thinking is I presume that what they call it the Big Bang, the beginning. It's a really bad name, and it was coined as a joke, like many names. Because the Big Bang was not big; it was incredibly small, and it didn't make any noise. So it's a really bad name. The name I give to it, in my thinking, is I call it moment zero, because it's the start of the flow of the time stream. So we can trace it back to now. We can trace it back quite close to the beginning of what is moment zero. And I act as if that is the beginning of everything. Because if you don't do that, you merely push the question back further. Because if you go, that wasn't the beginning, then you've got to think, well, what was before that? What was before that? So what I try and do in the thinking is go, that's the beginning. However, my own particular intuition is that's very unlikely. And my own, this is just speculation, of course, is that ideas like scientists like Roger Penrose in Cambridge has been suggesting that universes give birth to other universes through black holes. I don't know if that mechanism will turn out to be right, but the idea of universes giving birth to universes kind of makes sense to me. That feels like, yeah, that sounds about right. So that our universe is growing up. Now, the reason I particularly like that, and I think we should take it seriously, is because I'm sure most of you are aware that the way that our universe is set up is uncannily helpful. If it was tiniest, I mean so tiny. This is from Penrose, I think it's in here. I don't know if you can see that, but that whole paragraph there is a 1 followed by zeros. Can you see that? Yeah? It's a paragraph of zeros. That's Roger Penrose's calculation of the chances, if it were random, of our universe existing in the way that could later support life. It's so unlikely, it's incredible. But luckily, things are set up at the very beginning of the universe so precisely that when it expands, it doesn't overexpand and explode, and neither does it stop expanding and gravity pull it back into a crunch. It's exactly right to set up so that 10 billion years later, life can happen. So, what I think is happening with that myself is that everything is governed by the past. Everything. So, the past is the repetitive. There's a lovely, do you know Rupert Sheldrake, the biologist? He's an amazing English biologist who talks about the past in the same way. He's been a pioneer of this idea of the presence of the past for decades. And I don't think it's actually his idea, I think he took it from somewhere, but I'm not sure. It's a great idea. He said, look, we've got to stop talking about the laws of nature, because that's actually a completely defunct metaphor. And it comes from the idea that the first people who discovered these regularities imagined there was a lawmaker. There's a big man in the sky with a big beard, and he was going, let there be gravity. And there was gravity. So the laws of nature come from the metaphor of there being a lawmaker. Well, there is no lawmaker. So better to talk about the habits of nature. And that as things happen, regularities occur through, and they build up because the past accumulates, and now they just do that. So matter has got into the habit of trying to come back together, and we call that gravity. I've got into the habit of this certain tone of voice because I come from England, and that's my accent. Everything is a habit. These words which I'm using, I can only use them because they've been used over and over and over again, some of them for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they've become established. So what you can see with that is there's the meeting here of the habitual, which is a blessing, because otherwise the room would keep changing, like in dreams. And you'd open the door and be like, wow, there's empty space out here now. Oh, I hate it when that happens. But luckily there's regularity, which we need in this world, and that's the past in everything. And then there's like creative, which allows us it to be fresh, especially on the very emergent levels, like the soul. There it's very creative, not so much on the lower ones. It's quite repetitive. Which incidentally is why science has found it so easy to study physics and so hard to study the soul, because that's very repetitive. But this is not. So that's much more accessible to experiment. Because if you do an experiment, it probably will be the same the next time. You experiment with psyche, it's not like that. So, this was about previous universes. So what I'm suggesting is the most likely explanation is that this universe is actually repeating in a unique way what many universes have done before. So in a way it's more like an embryo growing up. So, the embryo is going to do, when I was an embryo, it just did what other embryos had done, and it turned out to be this particularly strange, unique end product, just like you. But fundamentally underneath it there's a pattern, and that pattern is because it's repeating the past. And I suspect the reason the universe is set up so well is because it was going to play out in a unique way something which had happened before, as part of an overall evolutionary cycle which goes back and back and back, maybe forever.
You want to elaborate on that from the multiverse?
Well, I just will say this. From what our spirit guides have told us, it sounds very, very similar. That things there are more than just one particular universe. Now,
That we know.
you mentioned embryo. I want to kind of go on that because we ask our guides many different questions. Embryo. The soul. Tim. When does it come into existence, into the body? At what point do you feel and do you suggest that it comes into the body and becomes existence?
Great question.
So
That's a great question.
implicit in that, the question is something which I write about in Soul Story. I think we should take seriously the ancient idea, which in the West is called transmigration of the soul. That's what Pythagoras called it. It tends to get called reincarnation now, which I think is a word that comes with too many assumptions. And what that's... We haven't really talked about death at all, have we? Okay, let me dive a little bit into death. So one of the things which I'm exploring is the idea that the non-material dimension is exactly that, and that we've evolved into it, and now we've arrived in it. That immortality has evolved. That biological life and death has evolved into a mortal soul. That was a fundamental idea I explored at TEDx, actually. How can we understand that? Well, one of the great insights of physics over the last 100 years has been that solid matter isn't solid. And that if you get down to the very basic levels, it's information. So what this is information on this level. It's information on all those different levels. So here you've got information on a basic material level, but here in the psyche you've got information on a non-material level. And as a metaphor, just quickly to try and get across what I'm exploring with the idea of with death, is to use the metaphor of a computer, because that's obviously something we're all familiar with now, which we manipulate information. So as a metaphor, what I'm suggesting is that, like on the computer, we soon realized we didn't want to lose all the information on our computer when it crashed all the time, which it used to. So we developed the way of storing the information locally on the computer, and also at the same time non-locally on the cloud. So it was on information to these two places, and when the computer then died, like they do, the information still existed. And I think something similar has happened in the evolving universe, so that we exist simultaneously as information on the biological level of body, and we exist as information simultaneously on this non-material level of soul, which means that when the body dies, we go deeper into soul, which we do anyway every night. If you cut off your sensation, you go deeper into soul. If you take ayahuasca, you go deeper into soul. If you dream at night, you go deeper into soul. If you meditate, you go deeper into soul, because you cut off from this, so that when this goes, off you go, because it's the information exists on these two levels. And the reason I think that's happened is because I said, look, the time stream's been individuating, and the more individual it becomes, the more conscious it becomes. Well, I think the biological phase of evolution, which is only a phase, don't forget, there's 10 billion years before there was no biological evolution. The whole, natural the universe didn't arise through natural selection or genetics. There was no genetics. That's a different level of evolution. Then you hit biology, and it becomes something to do with genetics and natural selection and maybe some other things. There, the process of evolution becomes about the development of species. New species, so you're getting very basic species, and quite quickly you've got all of these species. And the best way to evolve species is death. Because you're alive, if you survive, you do well, but you're going to, out the way, new one, out the way, new one, out the way, new one. And so relatively quickly, you can develop lots and lots of new things, which didn't happen previously. That's why it took 10 billion years to develop the physical universe. So you've got this incredible device of procreation and death. It seems to me that once soul arises in that process, the evolutionary process moves on. It's no longer about just the evolution of species. It's now about the evolution of individuals, which is what we are, individuals. So that death is great for species, but death is terrible for the evolution of individuals, which is why we rebel against it, because it feels like, wow, everything you've been is just going to be gone. And I suspect my suggestion is because that doesn't happen, that can't be lost. So it now exists on a non-material level, which means that when the body dies, you exist on that level. And you could say what I'm saying here, to put it in slightly controversial language, is I'm suggesting that heaven, to use our Western name, has evolved. It's evolved. Because it's a place of images, which is exactly what people who have near-death experiences recount. And if you look at the literature, you can see it evolving. So the very first experiences of the afterlife are described as a land of shades, kind of there and it's not there. And then that will become like a wish-fulfilling dream, the happy hunting grounds, the drinking halls of Valhalla. Like life, but better. Because it's a dream. It's a collective dream, and bad stuff too. And then that will become, when the religions get born, then you'll suddenly have places full of Buddhas and angels, and all of that will arise. And now is everything. Everything. Huge cities and waterfalls and rainbows and everything you can possibly imagine is there. Because it's evolved. Just like this world has evolved, it's evolved. And I also suggest that part of that means that we can only sustain that level of disembodied information for so long. It's a very emergent state, and a bit like I can only stay awake for so long. It's like I'm feeling okay right now, but within a few hours I'm going to have to go unconscious. And if I don't, I won't be able to sustain this. I just won't. You know, when I was young and mad, I tried to stay awake for 3 or 4 days, and eventually I just passed out standing up. You have to go down into a lower level to sustain the higher levels. And in the same way, I think soul has to reconnect with biology. And we call that transmigration or reincarnation. And the easiest way to understand it is information on this level having to re-engage with information on this level. So two separate things, an arising body and soul information, come into a symbiotic relationship with each other, a psychosymbiotic relationship. Just like you see in the world these symbiotic relationships between different things. And right now they're in a symbiotic relationship for all of us. And they're fundamentally different, which is why, I don't know about you, but I notice, my body has its own agenda, which sometimes is the same as my soul's and sometimes is not. And we have to negotiate that. We really do. And my job as a soul really is to take care of it. It supports me, but I have to take care of it and have a good relationship with it. But I also have to discipline it and hold it back sometimes, and all of that, because it's on a biological level. It's a different thing. And I'm in that. So when does that happen? I haven't got a clue. If I had to guess, I'd say it was a kind of a gradual thing. That it kind of, as the body arises, so the soul information starts to coalesce with it until they're like. This is my imagination of it, like this.
Yeah.
Oh, now they're moving as one thing. And they're going to move as one thing now until this dies, and then that'll disappear off.
Right.
And then, and now they're one thing. So now, if my body does something, look, if I listen to you, something's coming from the outside, I hear you. Now, something coming from the inside. Here's an idea coming your way. I'm moving my mouth, that's coming outwards. So, I take ayahuasca, poof! Because that's coming from the outside. But if I meditate, everything comes calm. And that's coming from the inside. Because the brain isn't just a thing which creates this background. It's more like an interface. You could say that the current idea in science is the brain is the way that the body makes things happen in the mind, but you could also say the brain is the soul's way of controlling the body. They're both true.
But just maybe talk about some of your books and some of your work.
If you're interested in checking out what I've written like 35 books, so I'll just concentrate on the ones that I think are the most significant. We sold out. We had loads. I thought we were going to have loads to bring here, but they all sold. So this is all I have left. So there's only one soul story, but it's available. But you can get it. I can send you one from England. It will cost you the earth on postage, but it will be signed. Or you could just go to Amazon and pick one up. Soul Story is my latest, and it's the one that is about this philosophy that I've been articulating. So this one here. The other thing I do, which I'll say a few words about, is not, for me, it's not just about philosophy, it's my experience. So the others, probably more of my time is spent guiding people to the experience of the deep awake state so they feel the big love. So this is the more experiential book, Deep Awake. So those are the two latest ones. If you're interested in our Western tradition, I'll jump back 20 years just because I think they're significant books. There's books about Gnostic Christianity and where Christianity actually came from and its real mythic meaning. There's one called The Jesus Mysteries, which was the one when they referred to a book that was Book of the Year in the Telegraph, and it got to number 6 on Amazon, for God's sake. It was quite surprising. We were called their official surprise bestseller. It says on the cover that it got into number 10 on the Sunday Times. It didn't. It actually got to number 11. It was kept out by Monica Lewinsky's autobiography. But if you want to understand about, there's two books, that one, The Jesus Mysteries, and one called Jesus and the Goddess. Sometimes in the States it's Jesus and the Lost Goddess, which is about the Christian goddess Sophia.
So many goddesses here, I'm just saying.
Yeah, those I think, in terms of the past, those are really interesting books. In terms of the future, Deep Awake and Soul Story. There's one other copy there of the Hermetica, which is another book about the Egyptian mysteries, which it's worth taking a look at. And if there's pictures of some of my others, and if you like the look of them, I'll happily describe what they are. Questions?
Okay, so questions for
I've
me.
got a question, and this is for Renée. You use the word enlightenment. I'm ready. You use the word enlightenment. Does that mean to you? Does that have that definition? And are you?
I try and avoid the word. I'm not. And I think it's an unhelpful concept. I used it for years, and certainly when on my own path, when I was in my 20s, I really wanted to be enlightened, and it was all part of a way of seeing reality, which I now don't resonate with. So my sense is that what I did was very common with lots of people in my generation and the generation before. We started waking up. We looked to Western spirituality and couldn't find what we were looking for, so we looked to the East. And then, having rejected Western religion, we kind of imported Eastern religion uncritically. And one of the ideas you get there, which you don't get in other forms, you don't get it in shamanism, you don't get it in Western religion, you don't get it in Sufism, is this idea of a kind of a enlightenment, and you're there. And what that idea fundamentally seems to be about, as far as I can make out, is the transcendence or destruction of the separate self. So because it's a myth of the fall, it's about getting back. So if you can get rid of the ego, you can get rid of the separate self, you can be in this emptiness, and that's better. I really don't like that. I think I don't like the idea at all. And it leads also to this thing that, this idea of a fully enlightened person, and having met quite a few of them, I'm not impressed. So my sense is what's happening here is much more interesting. Where I've ended up, rather than being some sort of is a place where it feels like, no, it's actually about being authentic, which is being in a place where I can go, okay, I'm Tim, and I'm hoping that this evening Tim's going to be great to hang out with, but if, like Debbie, you had to live with him all the time, or you'd see other things about Tim, and that's because we're all in works in progress. So Tim's evolving. And then there's this deep being in all of us, which is just, it's just this huge love. And then when we connect, it feels like there can be an authenticity. I don't have to pretend anything. I can be, hey, I'm Tim, you're you, and you turn out you're the divine as well. And so am I. And we can meet in that place of both and, rather than some fabricated place of supposed perfection, which always seems to lead to big disappointment. Yeah.
Chase. You mentioned briefly that this is a time when the soul is in crisis. Could you qualify or quantify that a little bit? Was there ever a time that the soul wasn't in crisis? And because it feels like if we're constantly doing this emergent thing, then that implies that the soul has always been in some form of crisis, right? And I can't imagine a time, according to this, that the soul wasn't in crisis.
Okay, you're absolutely right, and I don't want to mislead you to what I'm saying. So yes, absolutely right, and in fact, overwhelmingly, things are going well, in my humble opinion. There are some big problems that past generations have not faced. Environmental crisis is probably the biggest of those. But on just about every other count, our ancestors have solved problems unbelievably. Look at how we live. Look at how, for how long we live. The food we've just eaten. It's just incredible. And world poverty is going down. Child deaths going down massively. We are doing so well. Unbelievably well. So all of that, and overall, I think we should be really, really proud, and that can give us the confidence that we can face these other looming problems which are big and terrifying. Because look at the biggest thing in my lifetime is, look, we're men and women in this room speaking as equals. That's historically unprecedented. I'm a historian. That's one of my hats. It's just It's never happened before. This is extraordinary, and just in such a few decades. I come from Europe. We're at peace. That's never happened before. I'm an Englishman who's never been to war. My dad went to war. Whole of the continent, the whole world went up in flames. But so overall, hey, doing well. The soul crisis isn't really all I mean. Is we have a crisis of philosophy. Actually, that's what I mean, because we have this choice seemingly. Either you're on this side, which is like you just believe in a book, or you're kind of a retro thing, or it's some fluffy, whatever it is that makes you feel good, and there's no gravitas to it. Or if you're a serious intellectual, you realise that's rubbish, and then it's just a materialist worldview, or it's just like death's the end and life's got no meaning and we're here by chance, and if you're not intellectually robust enough to face up to the facts, you're just not up to it.
So you're talking about the paradigm shift.
That's what I'm talking about. That's the crisis.
And
time
being one of the biggest paradigms.
Yeah. And what I'm looking for, really, what the philosophy part of what I do is about, is I want to be able to stand up and say things like, no, I think the soul's immortal, in an intellectually credible way. So it's not just old religion or woo-woo, but actually it's like, no, that's a perfectly intelligent, maybe wrong, you can disagree with me, but it is intellectually robust, and you're not an idiot for saying it.
Yeah.
And I think we need to, that's the crisis, we need that.
Yeah. Well, the other question I have too is when you talked about like, we leave the form and we go into the timeless, which I'm on board with that. What's the organizing mechanism that then brings us back into body, and why is it distinctly through this baby state in a woman? It's a very specific process, and is that ever going to change?
Oh, I don't know if it'll ever change. I think the reason that we've got that is because of the way that biology has evolved. Now, whether that's always the way it evolves, but it's evolved for us on this particular planet. It has evolved through this polarity of the male and the female is a great way of shaping evolution.
So right now, soul and embodiment are intrinsically connected through that process.
Yeah, I think that's where. So the body is involved in the whole male-female birth, life, death stuff. I don't think the soul's involved in any of that, really. It's something else completely. It comes into a relationship with that. That's a different level of emergence, which it relates to, and that's what's happening right now.
For the sake of its own evolution.
Yeah, because once like I said, the life and death great for species. But once you've got the evolution of the immortality of the psyche, that means that individual souls can continue to evolve. And that to me is one of the essential ideas in spirituality. So one of the things that I see going on a lot at the moment is that people are trying to bring science and spirituality together, but in my humble opinion, they're doing it the wrong way. Because they're doing it trying to use quantum physics and things like this, which is fundamentally reductionist. They're making the same mistake. They're going to the least emergent, which is the very low level of reality, and trying to root it in that. We need to root it in the most emergent. And what that does is it's very easy then to go, look, they're saying the same thing, because science says it's all one, and spirituality says it's all one. Great. But it doesn't begin to address the nature of the soul, and it certainly doesn't begin to address the immortality of the soul, which is why one of the things that made me write the book was I was meeting lots and lots of great, interesting thinkers who were talking about science and spirituality, but none of them ever mentioned death. Ever. Just never mentioned, because it was too far. Because they would have suddenly lacked all credibility. But that's the key issue, isn't it? Death, that's the big one. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one we want to understand. What's the soul? That's the challenge. Yeah.
Hi. Thanks for your presentation. It's been very interesting.
Phyllis.
My name is Phyllis. What are we supposed to do that? I'm sorry. Hi, my name is Phyllis. I have two kind of different questions. So, one is the one that we were talking about earlier, which is about where is love and all this, and where is the heart and all this. And you started out can't remember what the statement exactly that you made was, but you started out the evening saying something about love, and I forget what the, what the thing of it was. So I would like you to talk more about how that works, because like you were just now even saying how this is a theory, and I think it's just so easy for us trained in Western logic, even as spiritually seeking as we may be, to like end up in the head. And related to that is just in listening to what you said, how you answered Chase, I thought, well, in terms of like this being a theory, I mean, the church is all over like the immortal soul, right? I mean, your difference, as I understand it, your difference is that, okay, stuff is on the cloud, we got it on the hard drive, we got it on the cloud, and then we're going to go into a new body and get this download. But I think I mean, am I wrong?
No, that's the analogy.
This isn't a lawyer, by the way.
It's crude.
Lawyer and writer.
It's good for shorthand.
Yeah, okay. So, but the question I have is that in religious talk, I mean, it's all about being attached to the soul, and like everyone's like, oh, my immortal soul, and even with reincarnation, it's about like, well, what gets reincarnated, and there's whole like, dialogue about that. So, what is different in what you're saying that doesn't lead, because we're a possessive lot, humans. So, how would you sort of frame what you're saying to avoid that really human pitfall?
To avoid what pitfall?
Identification with this immortal soul.
Okay. I wouldn't. I would encourage it, because I think it's actually what we are. So I am absolutely up for identification. I think identification is fantastic. I think it's taken us 13.8 billion years to develop a separate self. It is the highest achievement, and I think it is a major mistake of most forms of old religion that they see that as the problem. And I think it's because they have this myth of the fall, and that's the bit that's wrong. The rest of it, most of it is brilliant. Yes, in many ways, what I'm trying to do is I'm taking the fundamental esoteric tradition, the perennial philosophy, and I'm going, I think most of it is right. We just need to frame it in a way that can be, which is coherent with Western science, or modern science, not just Western, modern science, so that that can now be viewed in relationship to this as one rational thing. So fundamentally, I think they're right about the immortal soul and all the rest of it. I think the understanding underpinning it is a very old one.
What's the point then? If we're all individuals, like, where's the... Yeah, what's the purpose?
Okay, well, let's go there. Let's go there. Great.
Jeez, we had this conversation.
Here's what I think's happening. Here's my best guess. Look, first of all, let's do your love first, because let's get some love in the room. There's plenty of love in the room. Just let's make it permanent. Look, I said at the beginning, life is good, death is safe. What really matters is love. That's the insights of those sort of things that arise for me when I enter the deep awake state. It all started for me when I was 12 years old, and had a spontaneous awakening. The universe was full of love. And that's been the thing I've returned to again and again and again, and it's what I want to do when we get together. It's like, yeah, get the love. If something hasn't got the love, the reason I've ended up not in the non-dual circle, it's like, there's no love there. It's all dry and cold. It's like, my love's it. So the love's in the both and. The love is, we're separate and not separate. But if we're just separate, there's no love. But if we're just one, there's no love either. It's the connection. That's the love. So, to me, the love is the absolutely, it's the most emergent thing. It's been emerging. There was a lovely thing, I was watching a film by Byron Swim, and he was tracing, it's going, look, it came from fish. There was, at one point, there was a fish who did something different. Most fish up till then, or all fish, I think, up till then, they'd have babies. The male and the female never meet, it's all done, discreetly, separate, no love involved. And they have babies, and then they eat their babies. That's what they did. That's what animals did. They had babies and went, oh, that's food, and they just ate them. And then a few didn't get eaten, and those survived. And then a fish developed that went, I'm going to protect my babies. And a whole new thing came into the world, something emergent, that would become maternal love would become what mammals experience, and then that would expand, and then there'll be the relationship between a male and a female of a species will become lifelong companions, and then blah blah, and then the love's got bigger until now we can be here, with things like Christianity, you get this agape and meta. Oh my God, there's a universal, and that's total love. So that's evolved, and that's that high end of it, that meta, agape, big love. That's where it's gone. So that's the most emergent thing that I've experienced. So it's all about that. And then you have the question of where is it going? So the traditional idea, which I'm kind of wanting to criticize or question, is the idea that what stands in the way of that is the individual self. Whereas I think actually it's the foundation from which that can arise, which is why it's been developed. It's been over this huge length of time. We've individuated to not just an individual body, but an individual soul. And I think everything is made of the past. So your soul is made of everything you've ever experienced. If we're right about reincarnation, not just in this life, but in every life.
The soul streams.
And soul streams, yes. Let's use that term because it's easier to understand. I put it there so you could see it's a flow. You're a soul stream made of everything you've ever been. And it's what you are. It's not a problem. It's not wrong to identify with it. It is what you are. And through that, we can become, the more individual we become, the more conscious we can become. Until you can take that point of consciousness and pull it back on your deepest being, which turns out to be the being of everything. And at that point, the unconscious oneness, through conscious separateness, enters a state of conscious oneness. So one of the biggest, perhaps, things I'm questioning, if we take this beautiful image, as most people are familiar with it, like in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the liberation through hearing, where you get this idea of the clear light of the void. Actually, the best translation, I think, is the luminosity of potentiality. I love that translation. That captures it for me. That's what it is. It's the luminosity of potentiality. So that's the formless emptiness potential for everything. And the idea which you tend to get, or certainly that I got, was the aim is to dissolve back into the void like a drop into the sea. And that sounds kind of nice, doesn't it? It sounds like, yeah, ooh, that sounds good. Until you think about it. And then you think about it and you go, so everything I've done has been a fucking waste of time. The whole damn thing has been for nothing, but to get back to where you already were.
Yeah.
Great. So we got back to where we were with the great nothing. Really? I don't think so. I don't think so. What I suggest is the opposite. I suggest that's an ancient intuition, and the ancient intuition is very good. But, hey, they thought the brain was a cooling system for the blood. So, you wouldn't want to go to an ancient brain surgeon. So some things are right, some things they weren't. I think that's an early intuition, which arises for very understandable reasons, but it's got something wrong. What it's got wrong is this idea that we need to get back to the emptiness if we don't. I think what's happening is the opposite. What's happening when... Okay, let me just jump to one other thing and then we'll come back to this.
Analogies.
Yeah, no, I want to just talk about, because we've been doing the Buddhist thing, let's do the more traditional Western thing, because it's the same. I want to talk about God. Can I talk about God for 5 minutes? Can you take God? Can you use the word God? Thank you. That's great. So this is actually Renée's question that she said she didn't have time for when she talked about the communion of souls. This is what I want to share with you.
It's back to love too, by the way.
My intuition for what's happening now, where it's going, the evolutionary purpose, what's the most emergent thing that can emerge, and why we're doing what we're doing, is to do with God. I experience God. That's subjective. And I did when I was 12, and I experienced that big love for the first time. That was the vocabulary I had to hand. It was, oh my God, this is God. As I got older, I thought about it more, and it didn't make any sense. And the problem with God, I think, for most thinking people, and the reason that God amongst educated people is diminishing, is because God is seen as, even if you have a sophisticated idea of God, I mean, I'm not talking about a crude one, it's this being of love, this conscious oneness, this great wisdom, which is at the beginning of time, giving birth to the universe. So my problems with that are twofold. He's mean, and he's an idiot. He's mean, which is basically the problem of evil, which is basically, how come from this being of love that I experience as this benign, super benign presence, we get, I forget the name of them, you know, those little parasites that eat babies' brains from the inside? Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Well, it has to be dark without light, you know, you wouldn't have, fuck off. Really? That's not good enough. That's not good enough. That is not good enough for a parasite that eats a baby's brain from the inside. That is just mean, cruel, ugly. That God is a God I want words with. And he's an idiot. Because if you wanted to get to soul and consciousness, 125 million years of dinosaurs, why would you do that? And that's just insane. He's insane. So no wonder most thinking people go, no, enough of that God. How about this? The principle I defined the universe as was, this is the realization of potentiality on ever more emergent levels. So what if God is not where it's come from, but where it's going? What if God is where this is heading? This is heading to conscious oneness. What is conscious oneness? It's love. So what is the most emergent thing? It is the universe conscious of itself as love. And what makes that? Well, yeah, us. What if, just like my body is a communion of cells, which all function as one thing, that God is arriving as a communion of souls. And that what's happening when we come together in deep communion is we're giving rise to something greater than us. And that feels like love. And it's conscious oneness. And what's happening with the clear light potentiality is not dissolving into it, but the opposite. That we are individual enough that we can hold consciousness in the oneness without dissolving back into the nothing. And that each one of us is a filament in that light. And that we rise up, we become one with the light as one filament amongst the light, and then we fall away. And we evolve and we rise up, and the light gets stronger and we fall away. And that God is here right now as that power of love you can relate to, but it's not running the show. It's evolving from the show. It's something we're reaching towards. And that, I think, is what we're the purpose.
So if there are no people, is there any love? People don't exist.
You mean if we all died?
Well, yeah. Or if we just never came about, or on a star where there are no people, is there any love there?
On a star where there is no consciousness, I think if it's an emergent property. So if it hasn't emerged, it's a potentiality. It's a potentiality, not an actuality.
You said that, and similar to this, that death is bad for the evolution of individuals, and I think it's similar to what you've been saying, but this idea of spirituality where the world, Earth, is like a school, a life school, and we're here to learn lessons, and that's why we come down from maybe this source to learn these lessons and evolve. And I wonder, kind of on the similar note of like that if we're not dying anymore and we're not going through this life school, are we just part of this God?
I have no idea ultimately, obviously, but the way it looks to me and the intuitions I have and from the people I talk to and the near-death experiences I hear people describe and the ancient literature, the picture which I have right now is the best I can come up with, is that it's a bit, the metaphor for me is the obvious. Like I said, I'm awake now, but I will get tired. So higher levels are predicated on lower levels in everything. So the most emergent level, merging with, or in meditation, I can merge consciously with the oneness for a bit. and then I'll fall asleep, or I can't hold it any longer. So therefore, taking that metaphor, my imagination is you will go through just a near-death experience. You will be in the depth of the dreaming. You will have the opportunity to merge with the light, the luminosity of potentiality into the big love, where you will, in effect, dissolve for a while because you're just like, but you'll still everything, and you'll hold that for as long as you can. And at a certain point, you won't be able to, and then you'll find yourself coming down into the Ben's called the bardos, the in-between states, the dream states. You'll experience that, and then you'll be poof. And we do that every night, in a way.
Do you believe that we're here as kind of a school, or?
I think we're learning, yeah. I mean, I think, all of these, it's a bit like when I did the computer thing.
I think what she's asking, right, that our souls come back to learn.
Yeah, I think it's a metaphor, like the computer metaphor. They're crude, but it helps us get that sense of, oh, that's what's happening here. We're manifesting more and more emergent properties. The problem I have with the school metaphor is it can give a sense that there's a curriculum, but I think it's more creative than that. I think it's more like, how are you gonna emerge now, rather than have you learned this lesson? It's like, what wisdom will you find to respond to the unique conditions which is your life?
So what is channeling then, according to your theory?
I don't know for sure, obviously, but I think there's numbers of things that can happen. I see no reason why people can't connect. I had connections with my mother, who was 6 months after she died. It blew me away. I think that we can connect to soul in other forms, and I think also sometimes it can also be our own depth that comes through, that we are our own deepest wisdom. Because if this is true, what we're exploring here, we've already been dead. And just as when you enter a dream state, you don't carry with you the higher levels. I think when we enter an embodied state, it's harder to take with us, which is why we often do have that sense of remembering. And I think, by the way, that's what probably led our ancestors to have a myth of the fall, because they had a sense that we'd come from somewhere else where we'd fallen from, and in that way they were right.
It's like a wisdom stream. It's like trails or traces.
Yeah, the old things you've known before, and especially when you're kids as well. I had that a lot of, I'm rediscovering things, and sometimes dramatically. It's like, wow, how do I know this? So there can be your own depth, or it can be connecting with other beings. My sense is that in the non-local, we're all connected all the time. We're just, this is why I can feel my daughter in Scotland. She's there. She's there. But we're connected. Here we're connected through causality. So I'm connected with you because I can see you. But in soul, we're connected through love and through meaning. So it's psychic connections which form a web of things. Yeah.
Okay, to try to figure out the question, because I have about 4 running through my mind at the same time. I was thinking about Dolores Cannon and how she talks about that we come in and we've actually designed our life ahead of time, and that we just have amnesia about it, and that we bring in the same people. We have people that we know, spirits that we know, that we reincarnate with to learn or to redo certain parts of our lives. What do you think about that? And personally, I have a friend right now that I'm reconnecting with, and I feel from other lifetimes I know that it's true. And the connection of the heart that we have is like beyond anything I've ever experienced with anybody else. And I'm just so this makes it believable to me that we do reincarnate and participate with the same people, and that's why sometimes people are familiar.
Same souls.
My own sense.
Souls, yes, souls, right.
I think there's 2 different things in what you're saying. So the second one, I definitely experienced that. So
Known him for thousands of years.
So yeah, there are definitely people in my life. Peter Gandy, who I wrote numbers of my books, The Hermetica, with. Known him since we were boys and went on to do a lot of work together. It's just, we're just connected. And others, a few others as well. And then sometimes, like you said, you meet someone, it's like, wow, So that I have no problem with. I think that resonates with me. The other thing, yes and no. I think we need to be more what I would call paralogical, seeing things from two sides, seeing that it's not just all this or all that. So I think it's more like, it's just like this. I think it's like this. When we came to America, I spent a lot of time planning the trip. When the flights were going to go, who we were going to see, when I was going to give my talks. Quite a bit of it worked out. Some of it didn't. I was meant to see Brian swim yesterday. I was ill. I didn't know. This was a late edition. Turned out to be great. So there's a combination of projection, you know, and Deb was part of my plan, as was Renée. But they were completely independent people. They weren't part of my plan. It coincided with their plan, their intention. And we worked it out and it was fine. So that works for me. And I think most of us have that sense of destiny and that sense of a destination. Oh, I'm trying to get there, or this is where I wanted to get to. But that's a completely different thing to it's all planned out, everything is perfect, it's this way, it's that way. And I hear that a lot. And that idea,
The free will, though, that's where that's the part. The key is the free will.
Yeah. The other idea, it's all planned out, it's all perfect, everything that happens is just right, is an idea I loathe.
Well, I don't mean it like that either.
I know you don't.
With the aspect of the free will is what I mean.
And that's key.
Yeah.
Because if there's free will, it's creative.
Yes.
So you might have a sense of where things are going, but it's not fixed, and people are free. They're not pawns in anyone's thing. And so I think it's very important, because you do hear people going, you know, it's all, you know, everything that happens is. I really think that destroys the most precious thing we have, which is our ability to create and be free.
I just want to share. I don't know who said this, but I'd love to say that reality is the fruit of our intention. And I think that's so beautiful and poignant.
Yeah.
And by the way, if anyone is curious about soul connections and destinies and so on, the beautiful lady in red in the front row, she does regression analysis. She can take you deep into your past lives, and there you'll find a lot of answers. Powerful stuff.
Maybe I should just say,
You always got to plug other goddesses.
That's right. Do it.
when I was talking about the practical work and what Renée and Anthony did with me, just in a day, the fundamental thing that I do is connect souls. That, to me, that it is the most, you know, I started 20 years ago. Before that, I was teaching meditation and doing standard things. Still do that because it's powerful to be able to meditate and take your attention back into your being. And at a certain point, I'd never done it before myself. Now it's being done everywhere. I got two people to look at each other. And suddenly magic happened. Like a whole group of people to look at each other. And my God, it was like, what the hell? And then I'll get people to listen to each other, or just to gently touch and move with each other, or just respond to each other in certain ways. But the looking is the simplest. But what I'm doing with that is I'm just saying, hey, when you look at somebody, just see the obvious, which is you're seeing this beautiful face, totally unique, but what you're connecting with, you can't see. You're connecting with something you can't see. And it isn't made of matter, but you're using the face as a kind of a window to something you can't see. It's a focus, the eye specifically, a little hole really, and there's literally a hole. And you focus on that, and then suddenly you're in touch with, and then you're connecting soul to soul. And you know, oh my goodness, there's another being full of love and joy and fear and agony and dreams and failure and success, just like me. I don't know what they are, it's private, but it's there, and we're connected. And then you start doing this. And here you're connecting, and then suddenly you're starting the communion of souls. And then if you look really deep, there's formless being. There's spirit, there's formless being looking back at you. And then you get, oh my God, formless being is connecting with formless being through form. The one is connecting with the one through two.
Giant orgasm.
Yeah, it is. That's exactly what it is.
Multiple orgasms.
So, if you get a room of people all doing that for long enough, wow, the love is just like overwhelming.
Someone in the workshop on Sunday did say it was better than sex. Yeah.
A lot of people say that, actually. Yeah. Yeah, and what you see in each other is such beauty then. And then really the biggest thing for me when we do this, because I will get people, I won't do it straight away, but if I'm doing it at a retreat, we'll create a magic environment, make it beautiful, because we love beauty, lovely music, that gets the senses going. Relax. That's the first thing I want to do. I want everyone to relax, to be themselves. So they don't have to, be spiritual and all that. Just be yourself. With all of your warts and all that, just be yourself. And then through that, see this huge depth. And so we'll set it up, and then I'll get everyone connecting with everyone. Well, for until, maybe you'll meet 30, 40 people or something like that for 2.5 minutes or something, each one. And it's just like bang. And at first you're like, oh, this is interesting, and then, oh, this is nice, and then, oh my God, and then the next thing you know, it's like, wow. And
It's a tantric puja.
yeah, and through you go, and there's this huge.
More than once, I think.
And through you go. It's a really, and there's the soul communion. It's just there. And at a certain point, the thing I'm always hoping for, and it nearly always happens, is that at a certain point, nearly everyone, I would say, gets, oh my God, everyone is so beautiful. And at a certain point, I hope they realise, oh, that's what the other people are seeing in me. Because I used to think, when I started this work, the hard thing was to wake up to oneness. Turns out that's easy. The hard thing is to love the separateness. And to love oneself. That's the hard thing. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord.
Want to take one more question?
Do we got this every night, Maria?
I bet you do. I know. We're English. We're catching up. We're getting it. Are we done?
Yes.
I think we're done. Thank you so much, my lovelies.
If we could unite science and spirituality, it would heal a great schism in human culture. The problem is, they're saying very different things. So spirituality, in most of its forms, says that we are immortal souls on a meaningful journey through life. But science basically says we're clever monkeys. In a cosmos created by chance, we're here long enough to go, what the? And we're gone. Can continue to evolve after the death of the body, which is a central idea in just about every spiritual tradition. So here's my third radical idea for you to contemplate. Biological life and death has evolved into immortal soul.